Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
So you mentioned the corporation as being something that is subject to the rule of law, and if it doesn't follow the law, it gets punished, and so on, okay, and so forth. So here's a notion. I don't know whether it's just me thinking at the superficial level or there's more to it, which is the following. So I believe that that AI, artificial intelligence, right, is not a new phenomenon. That we have had artificial intelligences for a long, long time. And here's what I mean. Constitutions are artificial intelligence, and so is a corporation, and so is a bureaucracy. These are entities that are embedded. They have codes within them. They have ways of conduct. They have rules. They have regulations, and they exist. They cannot exist without human beings populating them, and so on. But they do survive the specific human beings who are running them at any given time, right? Machinery, like the bureaucracy, is for me the most frightening, but also the most necessary of all the AIs, because when we see this all the time, whether at the extreme level of, say, what happened in Nazi Germany, where every single person was able to contribute to, say, someone being picked up from a ghetto, put into a train, taken to a concentration camp, and then processed, and then always taken to the gas chamber. Not one single one person is doing necessarily something that is not mundane. So I'm sitting, and all I'm saying is taking your name. The other person is just leading you to the train. The other person is unloading you from a train, right? So that at no given time did anyone necessarily feel very, very guilty. At the very end, of course, they need to recruit some brutalized people, right? Because at some point, you have to go and some of these folks obviously, might enjoy doing that, but the banality, right, of banality of these kinds of events that happened tells us that there was something sort of above the humans that was directing it almost, right? This machine was artificially created by human beings. It has an intelligence, meaning it's doing something with almost a purpose, and then you can make it better or you can make it worse and whatever. But it is an intelligence that's artificial. Do you think if we start thinking about this new thing that's called artificial intelligence, using the history, where I think is rich in many ways, about the other artificial intelligences, that we can perhaps start maybe making some progress into understanding what's going on, maybe preventing things that may go bad, as opposed to mystifying ourselves and declaring what we're seeing as completely new?
Simple answer, yes. I agree with you. We've had artificial intelligence for a long time, and I think the corporation is a really good example. I often use that as a way of explaining to people that we already live in a world with artifice that has rights and responsibilities, right? These are corporations. We've legally designated them as persons. And we've done so because they have this kind of autonomy. They have this kind of accountability in social relationships. And we already have a series of strategies, a series of laws to deal with the artifact as a kind of social entity and actor. And we should really leverage that. We should actually look at that history and use that not only as a way of trying to respond to these new opportunities and challenges in the face of these other forms of artificial intelligence, but it should also build some confidence in us that we've been here before. We've already dealt with this kind of machinery. I think even going further back, writing is a kind of artificial intelligence. Already in the Phaedrus, Socrates says, you think as if it spoke with intelligence, but it doesn't know what it's saying. This is exactly what we're saying about large language models right now. It's the same set of problems. So I think by looking back to the long history of human thought in the face of these artifacts that we've created previously, we have a template for dealing with the challenges that we're currently facing with these other forms of artificial intelligence that we're creating right now. And I think the big mistake is to think this is brand new. We've never seen this challenge ever before. No, we've seen it. The scale may be different. The speed at which it's developed may be different. But the basic challenges remain the same.
Yeah. Well, let's do a mini workshop, so to speak. Let's give me an example, or let's do an exercise. Let's call it, where we use, say, and I agree. Corporation is really a very, very well contained example, where perhaps we can use some of those concepts. Let's cite something that is puzzling us or is mystifying us about AI. And we're like, we don't know what to say, what to do. We need to do more research, blah, blah, blah. And then let's use, the corporation concept, maybe try to make some progress in terms of saying, well, here's a potential way of answering that concern. So,
okay. So do you have an example in mind, like a specific thing?
All right, well, let's think through the corporation. The corporation is owned by people. It has a purpose. There's a law. There's the law. It can go and violate the law, and it could suffer. It could suffer the consequence of being dissolved. If it's really a bad corporation. I think its officers and all that are protected to a certain extent because personal liability,
right.
And so on. That's why so many corporations who do such massively bad things, the officers get away with it, so to speak, but the corporation may not, right? Maybe fine and so on. Okay, so we understand that. Now, maybe we can take a problem in AI that's puzzling people right now, which is, let's take the problem of, is an AI, let's say an AI system, let's say it's a GPT, which is owned by OpenAI and company, right? And it's a product, it's out there, people are using it. If that's if somebody who's using ChatGPT goes and then asks a question and gets an answer is something that drives that person to do something that harms themselves, is the AI itself, which would be the corporation, responsible for that hurt or not?
Yeah, so this is where we get into some pretty tricky territory right now because we don't have the answer to this question. And I'll even expand the example a bit with some other stuff that has occurred recently. So remember when DeepMind had AlphaGo play against Lee Sedol in this very famous game of Go, and the algorithm beat Lee Sedol took 4 out of 5 games. And when journalists were reporting on this event, they weren't quite sure who to credit with the win. And the question was, well, is it the engineers at DeepMind who actually are the winners? Is it the corporation DeepMind that made the algorithm? Or is it the algorithm itself, AlphaGo, who was the winner? Now, the journalists had to make a choice, and they decided to name the algorithm as the winner. But for a lot of our history with dealing with technology, crediting the technology with the agency is generally seen as placing agency in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And we have to find the human being behind the technology to credit them. But when the journalists and other people ask the engineers, well, don't you want to take the credit for this? The engineers are like, well, we don't even know how to play Go. We just built a neural network and trained it on some Go data. and it did this stuff. So we have this problem of this sort of shell game of responsibility. And we already have this in corporate responsibility, right? When the corporation does something improper, we often have this ability to sort of shift the responsibility from one side of the corporation to another side of the corporation. It also happens in organizations like governments. You can see, for example, during the Nuremberg trials with the functionaries in the camps saying, well, it wasn't me, it was the commanding officer, and they sort of tried to bump responsibility up the chain of command. Or the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, when the soldiers that were involved in that abuse were sort of hung out to dry by the Bush administration, who said, well, we didn't tell them to do that, they did that on their own. So we have this way of really creating this opening where we can shift responsibility through the organization in various ways. We do it with corporations. We're already doing it with algorithms and with AI. And the question that is being faced by not only citizens like you and I, but also by legal scholars is, how do we resolve these responsibility gaps, as we call them? How do we assign responsibility one way or another? And personhood is one way we resolve that. If the algorithm is a legal person, then the algorithm is accountable for the good or bad outcome. And that is something that would have to be codified, right, and recognized in law. But right now, we're living in this moment of time where we're not sure if it is a thing or a person. If it's a thing, then it's not responsible for what it does. If it's a person, then it is. It also is possible that these two categories are not enough. We might need a more finely tuned set of categories to deal with these new opportunities that we're looking at. And there's some legal scholars that have, devised what they call a gradient scale that allows for something in between person and thing. And there's some legal literature now that is really trying to build into our way of responding to this challenge a wider range of possibilities than just one or the other.
Yeah. Okay. So I consider myself more or less as when it comes to social theory, economic theory, as call myself a Marxist, right? Not in terms of I advocate whatever, the the way that folks think about Marxism, right? But there's a theory, right? And you understand that, right? So for me, things become a lot clearer, and a lot more just. Let's call it, for justice is something that we are concerned with, which I think we are. Become a lot more just when I look at an entity that was created by a whole bunch of folks, and that did something that hurt people. For me, it's very easy using my algorithm, let's call it, to pin blame by looking at, okay, who is the most powerful and who within this ecosystem of folks, and who has been benefiting the most from this, right? So therefore, if I had my druthers, right, even if it's a fault of the engineer, the C-suite folks are going to get it, right? Should get it, right? Meaning the focus is on what's the engine as opposed to the sort of the extra or the ones who are being driven by the engine, right? And I think this is sort of a deficiency that we have today. Sort of it shows us that there is a limit to how much we can use, even with things that we have been using for a long, long time, corporations, government, and all that, which is responsibility is usually devolved to the weak, right? The folks who can defend themselves from the strong, which is for me, it's the opposite, right? And therefore, I think, and our laws are structured that way, right? The CEO did not intend to harm anyone, and the CFO did not intend to harm anyone. But if you look at it a little more closely, CEO and C-suite set up the strategy, they set up the funding. Maybe they didn't fund the the security or the safety unit, and ultimately it ended up with the safety unit, the team not having enough funds to do what they needed to do to be able to ensure that the product is safe. And so with AI, for me, sort of weird because I'm using right now a flaw in the AIs that we have and the way we regulate them. to think about maybe we should use the emergence of this new thing to point out to flaws in the old AIs and fix both the old AIs and the new AI, meaning, okay, Sam Altman and his team and his C-suite folks are going to benefit the heck out of this AI, right? They are going to make millions and billions of dollars, right? And ultimately, they should be responsible about the harm. They should be responsible for the harm that they have caused. And by the way, if we are going to adopt this paradigm, maybe we should adopt it for the corporation in general and adopt it for government in general, right? The war in Iraq, we should not blame the soldiers. We should go and well, it's too late. Rumsfeld is dead, so that's too bad, right? But Bush is still alive, right? He's caused damage beyond comprehension that continues to this day. Damage meaning death and destruction, death of millions of people, directly or indirectly, and he should be held responsible. And the folks around him, which is, I don't know, maybe 12 people, decided to go and take humanity and put it in a hole. And so what do you think? Just sort of like a tortured perhaps way of thinking about this. But I'm looking at the rise of AI as an opportunity, which sort of leans on treating it as new, but also without mystifying it by saying here's how it how it's similar to the past. And hey, by the way, now that things are getting clearer, maybe we can use some of these concepts to go and fix what has been broken in the other AIs. Am I making sense at all?
Yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. Because I think one of the things we fail to realize, or that we don't fully realize, is that this is all about power. This is about who has power and who has privilege, and how that power and privilege are unequally distributed socially across our societies. And this is really what Marx is all about. It's what Foucault is all about. And that behind a lot of these technologies and a lot of the legal wrangling and the moral thinking, etc., there is power. And I don't think we've identified well enough who is empowered and who is disempowered by these various technologies. And we start to look at them from the perspective of power, we start to see things like you're talking about. Another element that I think we have to put into the mix is there has been some criticism of AI personhood because it is seen as being a step in a wrong direction insofar as it takes corporate personhood and now applies it to AI, but we're already wrong about corporate personhood. We shouldn't have done that to begin with. And we're just going to exacerbate problems with corporate personhood if we extend it to AI. And that means, as you, I think, really nicely articulate, that like a mirror, the challenges we're seeing in the face of AI might not only apply to the AI, it might also apply retroactively to other decisions that we've made about social standing of various entities that are artificial, like the corporation, like the organization, etc. And that we may need to rethink these categories of person and thing, not just for the AI, but for all of our persons and things that we've been dealing with historically. Lastly, there has been some effort to sort of come up with a third alternative to person and thing. And that sounds like a good idea. Anytime you have two binaries, it's like, well, what's the middle ground? What's that in-between zone? Because that might solve this problem of one or the other.
Yeah.
And there have been some efforts to do this for AI and robots. The problem is that middle ground has a name, and that name is slave. Because in Roman times, slaves were things that could sometimes function as persons, and therefore could enter contracts and do various commercial transactions, but they were still the property of their master. And so there's an entire set of literature, which I found rather surprising in my own research. I thought this was sort of an anomaly, but there's a lot of legal scholars that are saying we can solve the problem of person thing for AI, just we have to resurrect slave law and reuse what the Romans did with their slaves or the Confederate States did with their slaves. And that we can just repurpose the paradigm of slave labor for the robot, which of course goes all the way back to Karl Čapek, right? The robota means forced labor in Czech.
Yeah. Well, that sounds dangerous going that way. I don't know about you, but just my gut feel says, once you start, introducing that concept, it might be misappropriated and applied in different
No,
places.
it's very disturbing, and not because of what the robot or AI will suffer, right? We can put that to one side,
Yeah.
but because it puts us in the position of master.
Yeah.
And do we want to be masters is the question. Do we want to recreate a society in which we are masters? And I think that's already the problem that we're trying to break out of. And by going back to this paradigm of the slave as a legal category in between person and thing, I think we're reintroducing into our world a very problematic social hierarchy that was already a problem back then and could exacerbate those problems in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so wow, it's going very fast.
It always does.
It's too much fun. Okay, so let's see. I want to well, your books. How many books have you written about this? 4 or 5?
Well, okay, so yeah, but I would say the core books are the trilogy: The Machine Question, Robot Rights, and Person Thing Robot, all with MIT Press.
Okay, and so how long have you been writing? I don't know, from the beginning of time, but how long have you been writing about let's say it's called this new AI phenomenon, or the emergence of
So
AI?
yeah, I started there when
Hmm.
I began my professional career, but then I got kind of distracted by the internet, which was at that time, getting all the attention, and so a lot of digital ethics and internet ethics and stuff was going on, and so that was in the 90s. But by the mid aughts, like 2005 or so, I come back to this sort of AI and robot stuff because by that point, the internet is becoming pretty mundane, commonplace.
Well, it's
Um,
like the air around us. We don't even, you know, we don't
yeah,
even realize it's there.
yeah, and so AI was beginning to come back because we had that sort of AI winter after the expert systems sort of fell apart,
Yeah.
and then it resurged again with the new interest in connectionist architectures and the neural networks, which happens in the early 2000s.
Yeah. No, I've been a technologist forever, and AI specifically, natural language and all that. And I can tell you, we had many winters, right? I remember
That's exactly.
in the early 90s, there was this whole, I don't know why, craze about AI, and it died out quickly and came back in, died out. Yeah. But I think it started to take when we were able to collect so much data, right?
Right.
Towards the conversions of many things, hardware becoming cheap, a lot more people being part of the ecosystem, so you could collect so many points of data. Like the focus of my sort of technology career has been speech and natural language, and speech just was forever the most bedeviling AI problem. Even the most bedeviling AI problem is natural language. After that is speech, and way before after that is vision. Vision is a much easier problem to solve than the natural language and speech. But speech itself was so bedeviling, and then all of a sudden in 2014, when the Alexa thing came out, where they were able to do far field, I mean, you can talk to it from far away. Before that, Siri, but with the Alexa, Amazon Alexa, all of a sudden it was solved. Like dictation was solved. Well, I think dictation is completely solved right now. You can almost whisper something into something and it will get it almost precisely. But anyway, I know you're sort of interested in many things. If you were to pick one thing, one debate or one conceptual conversation when it comes to AI, what would you pick? Is it personhood? Is it morality? Is it what is it? What is it's unfair for me to ask you that.
Yeah, no, I would say probably the thing that is the guiding thread through all of this work is the question of moral inclusion. How do we decide the moral status of something? and what are the criteria by which something is in the community of moral subjects and something would be outside that community of moral subjects. And this begins from my early career in environmental ethics, in which we were trying to push the needle on including the natural environment as a subject of moral and legal thought, but also then to the artifact as a similarly situated entity that has traditionally been excluded from the circle of moral inclusion. And now we're opening up at least the conversation to think about how and if we need to include these things within our moral circle.
Yeah. And so you're finding the emergence of AI as a helpful phenomenon to help you sort of connect dots and maybe see things that before that we couldn't see, or how are you using the AI thing to help you sort of elaborate, and explore in your thinking about these important issues?
Yeah, no, this is a really good question. I think if we go back to where it began, I think if I had a eureka moment, right? If there was such a moment in my past, I think it's when I realized that out of the work of Emmanuel Levinas, this Jewish philosopher who sort of is the progenitor of this ethics of otherness notion that we have since his time. If you're looking for the perfect other, the other of the other that is always externalized and is always alien, AI is the perfect example of the excluded other, much more so than the animal. When I was in graduate school, there was a lot of work to try to get Levinas to recognize and open his way of thinking to animals, because he was rather anthropocentric with the way that he was looking at ethics and who could be other and what was not other. But the animal was rather easily able to be included. And so the next step was, okay, so what's the other of the animal? And the other of the animal is already the machine. And so my eureka moment was, what if we focused on AI as this other that is so other that it challenges all of our basic notions of who we are and what our responsibilities to the other can or should be. And that's where a lot of this thought began.
Yeah. And so I know, again, it's unfair. So you're trying to come up with a conceptualization of the other without having whatever is the object that is being talked about, without having to relate that object to a person that you relate to. For example, right? This here, it's just it's a thing, right? But it's more than a thing. It's a memory, right? Somebody gave me this, right? And therefore, I can't really other it, and I don't like other people othering it or disrespecting it, so to speak, because they're disrespecting the memory. But there is in that mix me, a human, right? And so a tree is a tree, but it's not a tree anymore if you look at it as being my property, right? So it's no longer an other in that sense, right? So are you trying to explore how do we talk about the other, or without having to include a human being, person, or an agency in there, or maybe you can tell me about that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the sort of effort I've been trying to develop out of Levinas is a kind of relational approach to thinking moral responsibility and accountability. That in the encounter we have with others, all kinds of different others, whether it be another human being, a non-human animal, a natural object, an artifact, we are always already in relationship to it. And that relationship dictates what we accord one way or the other to this particular entity. And that it is not the case that things are what they are prior to the relationship. They become what they are in that relationship. And can we build an ethics that is sensitive to that relational interaction, that recognizes that there are things that are more than mere things, right? There are ways in which we relate to these objects that we should be sensitive to how our relationship already makes us beholden to a certain experience of otherness. So I like what Mark Koeckelberg says about this. He says otherness or alterity is not a noun, it's a verb. It's something that happens in process, and that we need to be sensitive to the process and stop necessarily making it a substantive kind of decision.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a religious person. But one of the things that I do like about these religions, whatever it may be, or at least the ones that actually I think all of them do this, which is they establish relationship between these objects and sort of a deity, right? So it's not your thing, it's not your tree, it's not your rock even, or even like in Islam, it's even the things that we create. We were blessed to have the intelligence to create them by the grace of God, right? And so even the things that we create, right, they are not our possession, but the possession of a greater being. And so when you are going and desecrating, even in war, you go, in Islam, you're not supposed to go and I think, international law and all that, but religiously, like God does not like it if you go and abuse anything because it's their property, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of that sort of interesting innovation, if you want to call it that, where this triangulation, there's an entity and nothing is yours, so respect even the smallest thing, even slaves which existed then, they were not really your property, they were there, right, not justifying anything, but that's sort of creating another other, right, which is God, which you can barely relate to, sort of helped in us in mitigating our abuse of what we think is an other. And so I just thought of that now as we were talking about how this the otherness can be mitigated by having those objects be related to an entity greater than you, that you need to ensure that you respect, and that is also an other. So it's an interesting sort of mix of others that mitigates the harms of otherness that we I mean, I think we behave very badly as soon as we dehumanize another person. They're no longer a person. They are, a worker in a company that we don't like their behavior, and then so we insult them and all that. We don't see them as a human being anymore. We see them just as a representative of a corporation that we are having trouble with. But as soon as we see their name and hear their voice, and perhaps as soon as we humanize them, we start to behave the right way, which is treat respect and compassion. Maybe they're having a bad day and so on. And so otherness obviously is a bad thing. How do we minimize it? I was just thinking about how this creation of various others might help or does help sometimes or often in checking our misbehavior.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to be gained by mining our own traditions for ways of thinking through these problems. I think one of the surprises, and you mentioned it, is to look at our theological traditions to see, what we've already thought about with regards to a lot of these challenges, and to utilize that as a way of informing our responsibility for grappling with these grand challenges that we face now, apparently. And again, I think this goes back to what we said early on. It isn't like we've not been here before. We've been here before. We've, addressed a lot of these questions just in different guise. And we have to extract out of that long tradition of thinking and of human tradition, the tools and the strategies by which to respond to these recent innovations and challenges before us.
Yeah. So I will. So my concluding remark, and I'll get your feedback on it. I'm trespassing into your personal time, so I apologize. So we'll wrap it up in 2 minutes. And I will hopefully get I will go collect a list of all your books that you've written. I think also the many articles, the key ones. I have like a half a dozen of them that I read carefully in preparation for this. And I will post them when we post this episode of the podcast. But I think just to piggyback on your last point, I think there is much to be gained in someone becoming an archaeologist of past whatever it may be, past ideas, whether in theology or in theory, especially, let's call them the losing theories, the ones that were cast aside because somebody won, right? Who was in the debate with, I don't know, with somebody like Darwin, right? Or Plato, or, and there were thoughts that were just not pursued, perhaps because it was not their time. They were early. It was too early for them. There's a lot of thinking, so much wealth, I think, that maybe there should be a discipline, I don't know, in university, where you focus really on not staying within the boundaries of philosophy or the boundaries of history or the boundaries of our, but go and explore these, especially, and focus on losing ideas, right? Which may be, there's, when I go and read minor philosophers, I always find something really interesting about what they have to say, because they're coming from a different angle, one that has not calcified into almost dogma right now. And so you open up sort of your sinus, in a way, your intellectual sinus, to something, and you can breathe new air. So your thought on that, and then I will let you go, because again, I'm trespassing.
No, I like this idea. To take it back to this whole business of remix that I talked about earlier. This is what the remix DJ calls crate diving, right? You go and look in the discarded parts of the canon to find these deep cuts that people have forgotten about. But then when you're able to sample them and remix them and reconfigure them and reappropriate them into new compositions, you start to see things and hear things in new ways. And I think the art of the DJ can be kind of a guiding idea for how we do this, that this idea of archaeology in our past, to try to extract out of it these really interesting moments where we may have begun to think about something, but then discarded it. These deep cuts that we've maybe forgotten about. And I think there's a lot to be gained in doing crate diving in our own traditions, to find out the ways in which we've prepared ourselves for this moment, and be able to unearth that wisdom from the past and apply it now to the future.
Yeah. And I think Foucault did some of that, obviously. Also, it's really interesting to see the tracing, like, why did this die off? Why did this, and usually it has to do with mundane things like funding and, political pressures and all that, as opposed to sort of the logic of the idea itself. Okay, well, Professor David Gunkel, thank you so much. You have been very generous, and thank you for taking my raw thoughts and just articulating them in a way that they become like real nice paragraphs of text that somebody could read, right? The most the reason I enjoy these interviews is I come up with my raw thinking, and it just gets clarified by somebody who's thought about this a lot more than I have. So I appreciate your time very much. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. It's my pleasure, and really interesting and fantastic questions to talk about.
Well, thank you so much.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.